Star Wars Outlaws has been out for almost 2 months, which means it's time to sit down and give my full, spoiler-free review of the game. My name is James, and I started this channel simply because I love video games. If that sounds like you, please subscribe to my channel so that you can see more videos just like this one. Star Wars Outlaws came out in late August, and this was pretty exciting for me. This was one of the games that I was looking most forward to this year. I'm a big Star Wars fan. I love Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order and Star Wars Jedi Survivor. The Empire era of Star Wars, which is when this game takes place, is my favorite era of Star Wars. So this should be a game that I absolutely love. It was also just very exciting that the EA exclusive Star Wars license has ended. This is the first time that we're getting a Star Wars game that wasn't made by EA in a very long time. I am a big fan of Ubisoft games, as you probably already know. I'm also a big fan of open world games, which this was being marketed as the first truly open world Star Wars game, and I think it does a lot to live up to those expectations. Before I get much deeper into my review, I should go ahead and mention that I played this game on my Xbox Series X, and I played it for about 45 hours over the course of about 6 weeks. I did take a break and not play any for maybe about a week when Astrobot came out, but for the most part, I was playing it pretty steadily for that whole time. It has been about a week since I finished the game, so I've had some time for my thoughts to marinate a little bit, and hopefully that helps me communicate them a little bit better to you. With all of that out of the way, let's jump into the positives. First things first, they absolutely nail the atmosphere and the settings and the location and making them feel like true Star Wars locations, and all 5 of the planets that they've crafted fit very nicely into the Star Wars universe. And walking around the different planets and the different areas that you're allowed to explore, even when you're going on your speeder bike and stuff, they all feel unique and they all look unique, and so you can tell what planet you're on by what the world looks like, how the characters are treating you, how the characters interact with each other, and all of that stuff makes this feel like it is an existing world. Next positive for me is that this game is right in the heat of the Galactic Civil War, which is my favorite era of Star Wars, so I might be a little bit biased there. Specifically, this game takes place between Episode 5 and Episode 6. So, as seen in one of the trailers, you can go to Jabba's palace, and while you're there, you can see Han Solo and Carbonite on the wall, which is really cool. Jabba the Hutt is still alive and kind of roaming around, and so you can get to know him, you can get to know some of his minions, and you can be a part of the Hutt cartel if you want. And that's another thing that I think that this game did pretty well, is kind of letting you form alliances and break alliances kind of as you see fit, which I will be talking more about later. The next thing that I have to mention is that this game introduces some really great original characters. I like Kves and Nix. Their relationship and how they met is explored in this game, and I enjoyed that. We are also introduced to a character called ND5, and it was really cool to see what they did with the story between Kves and ND5. Kves has always been on her own, and ND5 is a battle droid that has been reprogrammed throughout a lot of the game. There's conflicts of Kay doesn't really know if she can fully trust him and rely on him all the way, while ND5 is struggling with his own programming and not necessarily being able to do what he wants to do, which sounds kind of silly when I just say it all like that, but the way that it's presented and in the context of the Star Wars universe, where droids do have like their own thoughts and feelings, it does make sense, and I think it works very well. Still related to characters, I do really like that this game is like 98% completely unknown characters. Obviously, you've got like Jabba the Hutt in there leading the Hutt cartel, and there's cameos kind of thrown in there from this character or that character, and none of those really bothered me, especially considering that the way that it's worked into the story, it would make sense for those characters to come across Kves at one time, especially if she does have the reputation in the Star Wars underworld that she has in this game. And then another thing that I feel like I do kind of want to talk about is the just general like Star Wars underworld, that we get to see quite a bit of it here. I do wish they showed us more of the different like gangs and clans and stuff. There are 4 of them in this game. Through interacting with the various crime syndicates, you do get to meet a lot of different characters, and that's where Kay Vess and the way that they've built up her character kind of starts to shine, is that you get to see that the way that Kay Vess grows and learns new abilities is by working with other people. So you might go and work with this guy over here in the Hut Cartel, and he might teach you some new skills and abilities. And then you might go over to this person over here and who's a part of Crimson Dawn, and then they can teach you something too. And by kind of working those relationships and being friendly with all of these different people is how Kay Vess is able to learn new abilities, which I think is interesting from just a progression standpoint, which is different than the standard progression that you see in a lot of Ubisoft and other open world games, where you are completing objectives for experience to gain a point that you can put into a skill tree. And then the last thing that I want to say about the criminal underworld of Star Wars is that in this game you really do get to see the Star Wars underworld like never before. Every syndicate has its own drama and its own people that they like and they don't like and their own motives. And I found a lot of that stuff to be pretty interesting, even though a lot of that was just kind of side story stuff to what was actually going on in the game. Now it's time to move into the mixed section. This is stuff that's not necessarily good or bad, but stuff that I still do kind of want to mention here. The first thing, this should be kind of an obvious one, is that this is very much a Ubisoft game, which means a lot of your progression and the open world activities are going to be built around, clearing areas, checking boxes, collecting items, finding things for people, helping random people with tasks. All that stuff that comes with Ubisoft games, all of that is in this game. I love Ubisoft games, so that kind of stuff doesn't really bother me. However, if you don't love Ubisoft games and you don't love any of those things that I just mentioned, this might not be the game for you. The second mixed thing that I need to bring up is that I mentioned earlier that the exterior of the planets, when you're running through the streets and stuff, they all felt great and unique. One thing that I will say is that all of the cantinas and all of the stores kind of feel the same. The cantinas they'll each have like a different layout, but as far as the design and stuff, as far as I remember, they're all pretty similar. And then as far as the shops and stuff, pretty much all of the shops are going to feel the same too. Some of the shops might have an allegiance to this gang or that gang, but other than that, all of the shops are pretty much the same too. I do think that there's a little bit of variation in that you can get some items at this shop and then some items at this shop and then some items at another shop, but for the most part, they really are all the same. And then the third mixed one that I really needed to bring up is that the game is pretty buggy. One specific issue that I was having is that when you were riding your speeder, if you could hit the tiniest rock or the tiniest little like ledge or something, and you would be thrown off of your speeder. And that's something that they definitely changed. I think they changed it to where you have to be going like, you have to hit something at like top speed to fly off your speeder, or it has to be like a wall or something. It can't be like a root from a tree sticking out of the ground or something. That's something that they did change. And the fact that they're patching a lot of these bugs is the reason that this goes in the mixed section and not negative. Before I give my negatives, please make sure you go ahead and subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to hit 300 subscribers by the end of the year. It's time to move into the negative section of the review, and I don't really have a ton to say here, but the 3 points that I have, I do think are worth mentioning. The first one is that it does kind of it does feel like it takes the game a while to get going. That there's a lot of introduction, a lot of tutorial from the time that you start the game to the time to a time where you feel like, okay, now I can kind of do what I want. You're probably looking at like a few hours. And those opening hours of the game really aren't very good. You are forced through some stealth sections, a lot of which are kind of long. If you get caught, you're not given an option to like fight your way out or anything. You just have to go back to your last checkpoint, which could be like several minutes away, which several minutes is not a very long time, but it is kind of a long time when you're doing stealth stuff, which is just kind of generally slow gameplay. The next negative for me is that even though you're given choices throughout the story of I'm going to side with this syndicate or that syndicate, you can backstab these people over and over and over and over again, and it won't matter. You can like backstab them and steal from them, but then and then 2 minutes later, they'll hit you up and be like, hey, we got a mission for you. And it is kind of immersion breaking. The game presents itself as being kind of a choice-based adventure stealth game, but these choices really don't even matter because the story is going to be the same every time. It might have a little bit of variation there. There is a point kind of later in the game where a specific syndicate will do something, and I think there's probably 4 variations of the scene, which it'll just be whichever syndicate you are most friendly with, and being able to see through that makes it feel like the choices don't really matter. And then the last negative that I have, and this is probably the biggest one, is that it doesn't seem like they knew what they wanted this game to be. It seems like they weren't sure if they wanted to make a Star Wars Watch Dogs game or a Star Wars Far Cry game. And so they kind of just landed right in the middle. So, as I did mention earlier, you do have lots of different characters that you meet and build your relationships with who will help you kind of get upgrades, and you can like ask them for help and stuff, which is very Far Cry. But then you do also have kind of a stealthiness to it, a stealthy and infiltration and kind of a hacking thing that's very Watch Dogs as well. Also, it doesn't seem like they really knew if they wanted this to be a hardcore stealth game or more of an action game. There's arguments really to go either way. It doesn't really seem like it's supposed to be a hardcore, like an action game, like a hardcore shooter, because you can't really upgrade your gun very much. That you have a little pistol, but that's really the only gun you get for the entire game. But then as far as it being a hardcore stealth game too, you'll start kind of building up your stealth abilities, and then you're constantly being put in these situations where you have to kind of fight your way out, which can be pretty frustrating when it doesn't seem like there's ways to actually make Kves better in combat. And I know that Kves isn't a mercenary, so her being more stealthy and more of like a spy type character would fit better, but I think they also wanted to include the action and the gunplay just because that is kind of a more exciting experience. I liked the game. I'm glad I bought the game, and I'm glad I played and finished the game. However, I don't feel compelled to go and get the rest of the achievements or really even max out the relationships with the different syndicates. That once I was done with the story, I was kind of ready to move on to another game. And that's it. That's all I have to say. Guys, in the comment section, please let me know what you think of Star Wars Outlaws. And until next time, The best way to keep up with me is on Twitter and on Instagram at James_Solar, and also on Blue Sky at jamessolar.bsky.social. Got it. Thanks, guys.